and welcome back to Organized Chaos. I hope you enjoyed Bob's update. And now we've got, I don't know, what are we going to call this new segment? Courtney had a couple of ideas for names, but it is, I like MPTF Influencers with Courtney Bailey, because we have an MPTF influencer with us now, Nina Shaw.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Nina. Yay. I know that this is my most joyful moment of the day, that I get to talk to Nina. Nina, we could not be more grateful for your time. Since I started here, you have been, you are so many adjectives in the nicest form of that. You are a mentor, you are an inspiration, you are an incredible member of our board of directors for now 2 years. 2 years? About 2 years?
About 2 years.
I think about 2 years.
Time goes by quickly.
Time goes by quickly. So I'm going to do a really quick intro, because everyone, I think, knows who you are, but you are a founding partner of, it's easier to do the acronym, but I'm going to give all the names in this firm, because as firms go, there's lots of names, but it's Del Shaw, Moonves, Tanaka, Finkelstein, and Lezcano. And Nina's a founding member. She's, as everyone knows, has been on our board of directors for nearly 2 years. I want to hear from Nina. No one wants to hear from me, but Nina has come from New York to LA, and you can fill in that journey. You're a Barnard College grad, Columbia Law. I think we've all heard of these institutions. They're pretty decent. They have produced some pretty fantastic human beings. And among her clients, for everyone, are successful and award-winning actors, producers, writers, entrepreneurs, entertainment executives. And Nina has had so many awards and distinctions. You are consistently on the Hollywood Reporter's Women in Entertainment Power 100 list, among so many other accolades that I wouldn't assume to know all of them. But Nina, thank you for joining our board. Thank you for being here today. First, let's just start with some basics. Give us an idea of your journey from Columbia Law to now where you are, and how you solidified your place, and why you came to the entertainment industry. What was it about that industry and that part of law that drew you to where you are now?
Yeah, in many ways, my journey is a very traditional one for a lawyer who trained at who attended the kind of school I did. I came to Los Angeles. I worked at a very large law firm, O'Melveny & Myers. I always thought that I would be an entertainment lawyer, and I was fortunate because at the time, O'Melveny represented Norman Lear and Bud Yorkin. And so I was really cut my teeth on all of those shows, the tandem TAT shows that so many of us know and love, like, All in the Family, The Jeffersons, Facts of Life. I could go on and on and on. So I worked on all of those shows, and I really learned the television business at O'Melveny, and with some feature work. And then as is the case in large law firms, which don't necessarily dominate this area of the law, it's more dominated by boutique law firms. I, after a few years, was looking to make a change to the boutique law firm community. And that was really, since we should speak candidly in these times, that was certainly the first time that I understood how different my journey was going to be. Of course, as an African-American woman, I always knew that, there were obstacles to my impediment, but I found that it was virtually impossible to get a job, even with my incredible credentials and experience in the boutique law firm community. And I was fortunate enough, finally, after answering a blind ad in Variety, to get a job at a law firm that was looking for someone who had done a lot of television work. And in this day and age, I would have been doing television production work, but because I had the Lear, Yorkin experience, I was able to get this job at a law firm. I'll be very candid with you. I think in part I got the job because there was no internet, and I did my initial interviews over the telephone. So to the extent that I might have been disregarded, I wasn't. And by the time I got in to meet the partners, I had interviewed so well that they were really happy to hire me. I stayed at that firm and became a partner, and then shortly after becoming a partner, left the firm with a group of other people in the firm to form the firm that I am heading now, and that was 30 years ago. So this has been a long journey, but it was a very tough lesson, that very first lesson, that unlike other people at O'Melveny who seem to lead and glide into these jobs, that those jobs were not going to be open to me. So,
you know, Nina, that's really curious. Before I ask about how you came to MPTF and what resonated about our mission with what drew you to being involved and accepting our question of being on our board, let's be candid. Let's be as candid as possible. You have a name that, like you said, on phone and on paper might not raise the racist red flags that people today, women of color, men and women of color, BIPOC, are dealing with. And you had a seat at the table and you got in the door. And once you were there, you nailed it so well that they couldn't say no. What is that experience? Have we evolved, or is that experience still an incredible challenge? Maybe this is 3 weeks ago, or before the world maybe finally opened their eyes. They're not fully open, but they are opening. What's that experience like for Nina Shah in 2020, coming out of law school, trying to interview?
I think it's always getting jobs in the entertainment industry and the legal profession is now much more difficult now than it was even when I started, because through social media, everyone and the internet, everyone knows about the business and knows kind of the intricacies of the business, is much more interested in being part of it. Mm-hmm. I will tell you that the boutique firms that dominate my business are, for the most part, almost exclusively white. At most, they will have one, maybe two African American lawyers, maybe one or two Asian lawyers. Virtually none of them, I mean, maybe two or three of them have Latinx lawyers. So my firm, which has about 26 lawyers and 12 partners, a majority of the partners are women and people of color. So I actually have two partners who are Asian American women. I have a number of lawyers in the firm who are Latinx, and one partner who is. But we are by far on our own. We are literally, there is no one else, not one other firm, certainly in the Los Angeles and transactional entertainment boutique community, that even remotely looks like us. And that is sinful.
It is sinful. It's disgusting. It's abhorrent. It's not okay. It's unacceptable at the very least.
Yeah.
So thank you, though, for at least, for you pulling up and stepping up and having that representation. I hope this changes.
I hope it changes too, but it hasn't changed in the 30 years since I started my firm. It just hasn't. And quite frankly, in the early part of that, most of the African American lawyers who got hired were often hired because I was such a competitive person and lawyer that I was siphoning clients off of my competitors in such a way that they realized they had to have someone who was a person of color, in response to their clients saying, how come you don't have anyone like Nina Shah? So I don't say that with hubris. I say that to be really honest. I was at the old William Morris agency once visiting an agent who I'm friendly with, and he showed me on his screen an email from someone who I bet a lot of you out there know, a very prominent entertainment lawyer who had written him, I just hired a Black lawyer. I'd like you to sit down and meet her. She's really great. I know how much business you do with Nina Shah. So I'm hoping you might want to consider doing some business with this person. Now, that poor woman lasted at that firm maybe 2-3 years, because she talked to me about it, her experience afterwards, and sometimes during, how isolated she felt, how alone she felt there, and how unwelcome she felt. So it's a big problem, and I hope it changes, and I'm certainly being very candid in my discussions, more so now than ever, about how awful it is that it hasn't changed.
I think Jen and I have conversations all the time. I think it has to be candid. It has to be transparent. We have to have uncomfortable conversations to affect change. Really quick, I want to go back on one thing you said, because I've been getting a lot of questions about, we're in a time now, for so many reasons, of education, raising awareness. You use a term that I get questioned about all the time, Latinx, that I don't know if the population as a whole quite knows what that means. Could you help to explain that term?
And ultimately, people should be referred to as they choose to be referred to. So if you are a Latinx person and you would rather be called Latino or Latina, then that is totally within your right. But it's just a movement that when you have a language which is gendered, which designates you as man or woman based on the structure of the language, there is this movement to create a non-gendered version, and that's all Latinx is. Because otherwise you would, as you know, you Spanish speakers out there know, the plural would be Latinos, and that would be intended to refer to men and to women. But there's been this movement, which I know a lot of people disagree with. They're like, leave the language alone. Language is beautiful, but language is an evolution, and I respect the right of people in that community who want to be called Latinx. And certainly the people in my firm want to be called Latinx, so it has become more common usage for us.
Thank you for that.
Courteney also said BIPOC, and that's probably something that is also a new acronym for the residents here. So if we could take a moment just to explain that and then carry on with our next set of questions.
This whole notion of who falls in that POC category, people of color, is one that's under constant debate. The only people I think who clearly fall into it are African Americans and Latinx people. In some circles, Asian Americans or Asian people or South Asian people, more so sometimes in the larger Asian diaspora, fit into it. So I absolutely use those acronyms. And I know, especially I think for older people, like my husband, for example, who is like...
I'm going to tell him you called him an older person, by the way.
We are both eligible for residency, but he's a few years ahead of me. But he's like, just please, Latinx and POCs and blah, blah, blah. He's just like, stop it. But yeah. I don't think we have the right to tell people that they can't call themselves what they want to be called. It was like when I was in college and a lot of people adopted names of African descent and wanted to be called those names. Whether like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, you did so or Muhammad Ali, you did so for religious reasons. But if any of the people in the audience will remember how much resistance there was to calling Muhammad Ali instead of Cassius Clay. And I think, I can't remember his opponent who often taunted him with that. I'm gonna call you Cassius Clay. But that's almost equivalent in many ways, especially if you're an African-American person, to hearing, I'm gonna call you boy, call you girl. Call people what they want to be called. It is our rights as human beings to demand that.
Thank you.
Well said. Go ahead, Jen.
No,
Sorry.
I was agreeing with your well said and saying thank you. Yeah.
Yep.
Thank you. I love being a part of the MPTF family. It's really, I have a very heavy schedule and I'm on several other boards, but when this came up and this invitation came to me, even though I'd said I'm not joining any more boards, I just couldn't resist doing this because I've always understood the mission. You know, when I started as a lawyer, the contractual contribution program was more in place, and people usually sign contracts giving a bit of their money to the MPTF, the payroll plan. And as a result, I had to learn about the MPTF as a young lawyer so that I could explain to people what the payroll plan was and why it was important that they check that box on their contracts. And while I know that practice has somewhat fallen out of use, it really introduced me to the organization at an early point in my career. But also, you know, I'm such a fortunate person, aside from the obvious things that you might see about me. One of the great fortunes I had was that I grew up in a time and a place where I was very, very close to both of my great-grandparents. And they were born in the late 1800s. And both of them were, in one case, the child of an enslaved person, and the other, the grandchild of an enslaved person. And my great-grandfather died between my second and third year of law school. So I knew him all the way through my adulthood. Yeah. And my grandmother died when I was a senior in high school. So these were people who I not only knew as a child, but I had, as in my young adulthood, I had very clear impressions of them. And they were so precious and so loved and so revered in our families that is the way I had always felt about our older community. When I think about the things that I learned from them, you know, my great-grandfather would often take my hand and he would say, you know, I'm holding your hand in my hand, and my hand once held the hand of a man, my father, who was someone's property. And now you will be a lawyer and you will change. And he would say, in 3 or 4 generations, we have changed the trajectory of our family from the time that his own grandfather had walked off of, his grandfather on his mother's side had walked off as a 16-year-old boy, a plantation in Virginia, to his life for the first time as a free man. So these stories were so imprinted on my psyche and so much a part of who I was, because for generations, my people have been what were called at the time race people, meaning that we have always cared about the advancement of the race. And it has been part of our mission in life. So I saw my work with the MPTF as an extension of my, my battery's running low.
I'm going to ask you a very ridiculous and easy question while you plug in so that it doesn't require a heavy-duty answer. Is that a grill that's covered up in your back patio porch area?
Yes, it is.
That is a serious outdoor grill. I love it.
Yeah, it is. Actually, I have these grill covers that I love from a company called grillwraps.com. So I know that because they're almost 20 years old, so I'm replacing them. So.
Well, okay, so now not only did you come and grace us with your presence, you may have just taken care of my Father's Day presents as well with that recommendation, so thank you. That's fantastic. So, Nina, I was going to ask you, which you've already answered, what about MPTF resonated with you? And you said that so beautifully. And thank you for continuing to be an advocate, because this payroll pledge plan program that doesn't quite exist as robustly as it used to, we really rely on advocacy and word of mouth to share with people, because it's not forced. It's not a mandate. Right. And now it's something different, which it's evolving. But I understand that we are not a social justice organization, but I feel that in our mission we are, and that we are here to take care of our own, and that we are here to take care of vulnerable people and populations. And right now it is the Black Lives Matter movement. It is for all of us. It is not a Black problem. This is a white problem more so than it is anything, because it isn't. We need allies, and we need to step up. My children are Black. They identify as Black, and it is my job to teach them, and we've taken them to protests And I want to ask you, I mean, one, I'm hopefully optimistic, and I understand that my position, I will never understand. I'm trying my hardest, and it hurts me to my core, but I'm so hopeful that people are continuing to raise their voices, and that it is a diverse crowd, and that they are going out every single day. What beyond protesting? Like, first of all, I think we keep asking the Black population to solve this. Well, what can we do? What's your answer?
Well, first of all, I would say, because so many of the people who are watching this program are and have been during their career artists, art is such a great influencer. And I think art used to convey the aspirational values of the society has been a big part of change. Art used in a way that is not so good has also been a big part of the problem. But I would say that I would ask people to educate themselves. I think one of the issues that we face, unfortunately, in this country is that our educational system, especially as it relates to the teaching of American history, has always focused on kind of the American exceptionalism to the detriment of the realistic, depiction of what our American history was really like. So for example, a lot of times I hear people say things like, my family never had slaves. This is not my problem. My folks came here on a boat from Italy, from wherever, and we worked hard and we stuck to it and we did our best and we achieved the American dream. And I think, unfortunately, you're allowed to think that. You're allowed to not understand how much the bedrock of the American economic system is based on 250 years of unpaid labor. Those ran businesses. Imagine a business where you didn't have to pay the people who worked there, and you provided them with substandard housing and food, and all the other horrors of that era. And so people they don't understand that as the bedrock of the American economic system, but they also don't understand over time how the system has continued to contribute. I think maybe many in the audience who experienced World War II or the years after World War II will relate to the GI Bill and how changing the GI Bill was for Americans. It propelled Americans into home ownership. Well, if you were a Black GI, you were entitled to the benefits of the GI Bill. But if you were a home builder in that era, you were legally able to discriminate. So imagine a situation where you're non-Black or non-brown, or in some cases, non-Jewish person can live anywhere and get the benefit of a home loan, which is paid for, insured by the government, and paid by all taxpayers. Well, if you were an African-American GI coming home after World War II and looking to take advantage of the GI Bill, your ability to do so was severely restricted by law and other social restrictions that existed at the time. That is an ongoing contribution to a state of servitude. And so when you say, but I never had slaves, but you often were able to take advantage of opportunities that were not available to people like mine, people like me. I tell the story often, and I know we're closing. My great-grandparents and my grandmother would often, because we lived very close in Charlottesville, Virginia, where the town where my family is originally from, certainly in the post-Civil War period, we lived very close to the University of Virginia. And my great-grandmother would take me walking around the university, around the perimeter. We almost never went in. And often they would stop and they would point. And my great-grandmother would say, that's where my dad's house was. And then my auntie's house was over here. And sometimes I would run all the way down, and we owned everything from this fence here all the way, and she would point further than you can see. And then I came to understand many years later that the University of Virginia and the state of Virginia had, by eminent domain, taken a vibrant Black neighborhood, barely compensating people for the loss of their homes. And in my own family, we went from a state of home ownership to a lack of home ownership until the 1940s, when my great-grandparents went to work in the factories in the North and were able to save enough money to buy a home again then. So can you imagine losing your home in the early part of the 20th century, and it took you another 40 years to be able to afford it? That's the story of American history that almost never gets told. And maybe when you learn that story, you will be a bit more sympathetic in understanding why people in the African American community in particular feel that they have lived under a system of economic duress that began in the era of slavery, but continued well into the civil rights gains of the 1960s.
So, my husband is a teacher at a high school that has a lot of work to do. I'm not going to name the high school or the system or anything, but it has a lot of work to do. And thankfully, it's why I'm trying to stick to optimism. We had a conversation with the Black Family Student Union last night about, you have to take an elective to hear a real part of history. You have to go step outside of core curriculum to hear the part of history that is not an opinion. It is not subject. It is history. It is history as defined by the word history. It's just, why are we not being taught that? Why are our children not being taught that? And they're finally having talks of curriculum changes. How do you feel? Be totally honest. Do you feel optimistic? Are you not there yet? I'm seeing policy changes and things changing and people being elected and voters. Where are you at right now?
I certainly feel more optimistic than I have ever felt, and that says a great deal for someone like myself who was born in the mid-50s and lived through, even as a young child, lived through the civil rights movement and got to see the country make a lot of change and also lose some ground in the years since. But this does feel different. It does feel that younger people and more white people are stepping up and really taking responsibility for educating themselves and asking for that tough things happen. But I also know that, who would have ever thought that we would be in the times that we are in now, 8 years ago. So things can change very quickly and can flip in the other direction. So I hope that we have the ability and the mettle to just keep going forward. But I am certainly more optimistic than I have ever been, but it is a guarded optimism, because I also know that to be in power means to not always be willing to give that up. So we're going to have to see some major changes in our executive suites. We're going to have to see major changes in our educational institutions. And we're also going to have to, and I know this doesn't always resonate for people who have grown up believing that the police are their protectors, that we will have to change the nature of policing in America. Because to be an African American, to be a brown person, even at my level of success and relative wealth and insulation in my beautiful home, is to still have a basic fear of the police. Mm-hmm. It is still to be, even when I go on a walk in my neighborhood, I never walk out of my house without my driver's license and a business card. Because I know that I can, and I have been stopped while walking on the streets of Beverly Hills. And sometimes it's very casual. The police roll by and say, "Are you okay? Can I help you?" Which is kind of a nice code for, "Do you belong here?" But sometimes it's not so nice in that you get stopped and you get asked, and you get told that there have been some break-ins in the neighborhood, or you get told that in some cases that someone has called and said they saw you walking and were concerned. So there's nothing in this experience that insulates you. There's no amount of wealth, there's no amount of success that insulates you from the everyday experience of being an African American in society. And I know that's something that maybe feels odd and foreign and maybe even a little blown up to your audience, but I can tell you that there has not been a day of my life living in America that on some level, someone hasn't reminded me that I'm an African American woman. And I am othered, meaning that I am treated as being either, even when you say things to me like, are you the first person in your family to have gone to college? Oh, or God, your family must be so proud.
So proud of you, right? Because how did you get to this position?
Yeah.
Yep.
And when I say, well, actually, I'm the fourth generation in my family to have attended a college or an equivalent institution. And then I always say very lightly, because you want to make people feel comfortable, but I'm the first person to have not gone to a historically Black college or university, and that makes me a bit of a pioneer in my family. But it's just the idea that you could look at me and you could think that that was, A, had to be true, and B, that it was an appropriate thing for you to ask of me. Ask me about having gone to Barnard. Ask me about, how I feel about women's colleges. Ask me any of those questions that are relevant to my own personal experience, but stop asking me questions that are relevant to your stereotype of who you think I might be. So.
The fact, but I know we don't have a lot of time, but Nina, I hope that everyone hears, you have just shared with everyone, regardless of color, which is what I want everyone to hear. Every single day you are reminded of who you are. Every single day. It is a part of the system is not broken. The system needs to change. The system operates how the system was intended to operate. It was set up in a way. No one broke it. It was not set up properly with equality in mind for everyone. Equality for one race, that is not equality. That's right. A wrong use of that word. So I think everyone who says, yeah, my family didn't own slaves, I checked into it. And we fought. Okay, first of all, let's recognize the plight of our brothers and sisters as human beings. It's simple and complex at the same time. I want to quickly ask you, Bob and I had talked, and everyone's got a book list right now. It's as trendy as it is helpful and educational. And as Jen mentioned, we're going to be we're a film and television, so we're looking at content and how to educate and have a conversation. But also, there's some fantastic books out there, and 3 books that I ordered are not on the list that you shared with Bob. So can you give us a little homework? Do you have any recommendations of things that we should educate ourselves, everybody?
Well, when Bob asked me for a list, I thought there's a lot of lists floating around, so let me see what I can do to make my list a little bit different. So one of those—
You did. It's wonderful. Yes, go ahead.
That I picked was by the esteemed historian Lerone Bennett Jr. called Before the Mayflower. In its first original writings, it was called A History of the Negro in America, 1619 to 1962. It's been now called A History of Black America, 1619 to 1964. But it tells you that story of American history that's rarely taught in schools. And I remember reading it for the first time in its original. I was probably in the 5th or 6th grade, and it just opened the world to me of what the kind of contribution that my people had made to America. In that same vein, I picked a book by the esteemed white historian Eric Foner, who some of you may know. He's Naomi Foner, the writer-director's brother, and he has written extensively about the period of Reconstruction. That's a period of time that often gets just totally glazed over in American history, but it's very important because until the United States federal government handed the jurisdiction of the South back to the Confederacy, so to speak, there was tremendous advancement for African Americans. My 3 times great-grandfather and my 2 times great-grandmother both went to normal schools that existed in the South and that were populated primarily by young Jewish women from the North. who traveled to the South, women who are often described as spinsters in the language of that time. And if you finished these schools, you got the equivalent of a high school and a college education. And the idea was that you would just go back out into the world and you would, we used to say, each one teach one. And that ultimately the race would be educated, and we would throw off the cloak of as often described by Du Bois and others as the cloak of ignorance that slavery required, because as everyone knows, it was illegal to teach a slave to read, an enslaved person to read and write. And can I say something? I say enslaved person because to call someone a slave is to describe them in a way. They are people who were enslaved. And that's why you hear me say I'm the descendant of enslaved people. I am not the descendant of slaves. So I really feel like knowing Reconstruction is important, because what you will see in the Reconstruction period is an enormous advancement, education, serving in Congress. I mean, just incredible gains by African American people, or colored people, or Negro people, as we would have been called at that time. And all of those gains were reversed when the federal government handed the governance of the southern states back to the Southern Command. And the way it impacted my own family is that you had two generations of people who had the equivalent of a college education. The state of Virginia made education be beyond the 8th grade non-mandatory, and as a result, were able to close all Black high schools. And so if you were white, there was a high school and you could go to it and finish high school. If you were Black, you could only be educated until the 8th grade. And that lasted until my grandmother finished the 8th grade and went away to college, because that was the only way she could get. She went to Hampton Institute. It was the only way she could get a post 8th grade education. Now, she told me a great story that what used to really happen is the teachers taught you everything they knew, but they had to secretly teach you, because if anyone from the school district came around and learned that you were learning Latin, that you were learning advanced mathematics, that you were learning and reading things that were beyond an 8th grade curriculum, those teachers could be fired, and those schools could lose their funding. So can you imagine an entire state decided that a portion of its tax-paying citizens could not have access for their children to a high school education? These are things that are not always known about America. Mm-hmm. And so I picked books that tell you this story, because I think in my naivete that if you're better educated, if you understand the world you come from, then you will be a more sympathetic person to people who are unlike you. So those are two books that I kind of. And
I love that. We'll share that with others. I'm just going to piggyback. Yesterday, when we went to this kids march, Martellus Bennett, who is an NFL legend, who literally one of the most prolific NFL superstars who cut his own career short to be an advocate. And he has a series of children's books for anyone out there who has children, who has grandchildren, or just for themselves, that are fantastic. And he read it to a group of kids yesterday, and he's got 10 plus books. So it's just a wonderful resource that we should all, it starts from the top down and bottom up. Nina Shah, I adore you. We are so grateful for your time today. Thank you so much for being a part of our mission and for being such a wonderful advocate for us and for the global population.
And first of all, thank you for inviting me. First and foremost,
Absolutely.
I have such a regard for the history of our business. At the end of the day, one day, years ago, I was a girl in an apartment in Harlem, looking at the Late Late Show, looking at the work that so many people who have been part of the MPTF and who are probably even now living in the MPTF home. And those stories, although they didn't often feature people like me, they taught me to dream. They made me love art. You have contributed so much that you don't know, because even when I was even when I was a young girl, it didn't matter as much as it should have, perhaps, that the people didn't look like me. I still looked at, stories like Marty, stories like, when I think about the things, Rebecca, when I think about the classic films that informed my growing up and that I loved, and that fueled my desire to be part of this business. I am so grateful to all of you, and grateful that you gave me this time to tell a little bit of my story.
So before we completely wrap up, and please know, Harry, Brett, Corinne, we are going to come to your poetry hour. If we need to hold some of the poetry for next week, we will. I want to say, Nina, some of, not your contemporaries, but some of the people that you worked with on Facts of Life, I mean, certainly, Bud Yorkin had lived here. Irma is with us.
Oh yes, Irma, wonderful Irma, who I met early in my career. I don't know that I ever stuck with her, but I always remember meeting her. Yeah.
And she was, in my opinion, one of the people that, along with Norman Lear, were trying to make better inroads and show more inclusivity and diversity and give equality for people of color in the 70s with shows like Good Times. And I grew up, like, that was the era I grew up in. Facts of Life was mandatory viewing for me. And All in the Family was something that I know changed the perspective for my grandparents. And it is art that can make a difference, but it's not just art, it's art and everyone taking to the streets and raising their voices and finding the best way that they can to change perspective of people that don't realize they think they're playing a fair game on the same field, but the refs and the rules have always been an advantage for one of the teams and not the others. And that team may not always be aware of it, but they need to be shaken a little bit and made to understand that the game has never been fair.
Shaken a lot. We're shaking them up a lot, really hard.
But we're going to be a better country for this. I know sometimes it's hard to let go of the things that formed you. It's hard to let go of the beliefs I know I'm also speaking to an audience of people, many of whom followed their dreams to become things that maybe even their own families didn't understand. I know I speak to an army of people who really, have always thought outside of the box. And so I am so thrilled, like I said, to have had this opportunity, and I will absolutely cherish this day and the memory of being here for you.
Thank you so much.
Nina. I hope that my two daughters get to meet you one day, and I will play this interview, even if the 2- and 5-year-old don't quite, oh, she's 6 now, don't quite get it. They're getting it. Nina, we love you. Thank you so much. Thank you, Jen, for having us.
Of course.
Let's all stay well.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you.